So I have a starter, all right, and and most of y'all may not know about this because I get my team to edit out every time I mess up. But one of my biggest fears is being invited to speak on stage because like I've finally achieved it. All my peers, they all think I'm the shit and they've invited me to speak on stage and I've been prepping for a really long time to make this presentation and then I walk on stage and I look at the crowd and I'm ready to present and then I start to stutter. Like I want to get the words out of my mouth, but they're just not coming out. And everyone's just looking at me, and there's just silence. And it's awkward and it's painful. Now, the reason I've not told anyone about this, let alone made a YouTube video about it, is because I want people to think I'm the shit. I want people to look at me and think, oh, this guy's really capable and he's successful, and I want to buy from him. Okay. And if you look at the people on this platform that have sold the most, whether it's products or it's anything, right? The people who have sold the most, they're all people who talk about their wins, they show their strengths. None of them talk about their insecurities or their vulnerabilities. And so I thought that if you want to be successful, if you want to build a successful personal brand, you shouldn't talk about your insecurities. You shouldn't talk about your vulnerabilities. Or at least that was my belief system before I found Scott Galloway.
I'm a 59-year-old man that's still not over the death of his mother. And I talk about it.
Scott talks about his biggest insecurities, but still comes off as a really successful guy.
We want to put a cattle prod up the ass of the economy.
He says some of the most unhinged stuff, but still holds an incredibly prestigious job.
Jesus Christ. Jeez, come on, dude. You're 0 for 2.
He has no filter, but he still constantly appears on national TV and not on like Comedy Central or something. He's on one of the most corporate and buttoned up networks out there.
The most trusted name in financial news.
In this video, I go in depth into the personal brand of Scott Galloway. I talk about how he has built it by doing the opposite of what everyone else is doing, and how you can take some of the things that he does and put it into your own personal branding strategy.
The creators is if you come up with an insight, beat the shit out of it. We're under the impression as creators that everybody watches everything we do. I put out a newsletter, it goes to 500,000 people every Friday, and my editors and my analysts are always like, well, we said this before. And I'm like, well, let's say it again. It's okay. The majority of people aren't following every word we say over and over.
So we've all heard of repurposing content, right? You make a podcast and you repurpose that into a bunch of TikToks or maybe YouTube clips. You make a blog post and you repurpose that into a LinkedIn post and then repurpose that into a newsletter. But no one talks about repurposing ideas. If you have a good idea or a good insight, you should, like Scott says, beat the shit out of it. Because one, not everyone watches your video, so there's a good chance they missed it. And two, even if they did hear this idea of yours, there's a good chance they forgot about it. Like, do you remember the second last video that you watched? You probably don't, right? And so your audience probably doesn't remember the last time you mentioned the same idea. And the other great benefit of saying a really good idea again and again is there's a good chance it could become a famous saying. Like in the video that you just saw, Scott was talking about how AI is the Ozempic for corporations. Now that's a really good, slick insight. Like it's short enough where it could be on a t-shirt, and it has two really hot topics like AI and Ozempic. And because Scott said it again and again, it became a famous industry-wide saying. Like many people started quoting him. People who didn't even know who Scott was started talking about it. And another great example of this is how AI is not going to replace you, but someone who uses AI will. Like I'm sure you've heard about that saying, right? I'm sure you've heard it. Now that was first said by Nina Shkik. And she would talk about it all the time. Like every single one of her interviews, every single one of her articles, she would just talk about that same idea again and again. And because she repeated it so many times, it became an industry-wide saying, and now everyone's heard of it. So if you come up with a really slick saying and you're like, that was really clever, you should say it again and again, because you're not going to come up with these every week. You may come up with one in an entire year.
Kathy Wood, she put out a tweet the other day saying that their losses were an underappreciated asset In other words, she has lost so much money, so much of other people's money with her dipshit head up her ass investment strategy, that it's an asset. Her losses, which will offset future gains, are an asset. She actually tweeted that out. And I can immediately weigh in and go, this is the stupidest fucking thing. And just more evidence that this CNBC idolatry chunky glass woman talking about absolutely nothing can result that awareness is more important than returns. I can say that. CNBC would have their hair on fire.
Okay, you have a bunch of Kathy Woods in your industry too, right? I'm talking about people who speak out of their ass. Maybe they run scams. Maybe they just are just sketchy people. And everyone kind of knows that these people are sketchy, but no one has the balls to call them out. You should be that person who's going to call them out. Because not only will you be helping a bunch of people not get scammed and in turn turning those people into lifelong fans, but you'll also blow up because people love scandals and call outs and exposés. Like look at Coffee's. Also, when you call people out, you're generally putting yourself in a point of authority. So there's also that advantage in terms of optics. And if you don't want to be as brash as Scott is, you can call people out in a much more subtle way. But just make sure that you call people out if you see someone doing something sketchy.
My space is a peanut butter and chocolate combination of the following. And I think you need, after establishing some resonance and getting good at a medium, you really want to say, what is the chocolate and peanut butter? It's no longer enough to have one point of differentiation. I think of it as you have to have two. And my 2 points of differentiation are: one, I'm a white heterosexual male in his 50s that talks about his emotions. That is a white space. Society has trained people with my skin color, my sexual orientation, and my age and my gender to not speak about their emotions.
There are so many people now building a personal brand that it's hard to stick out. And so you can't just have one thing. You got to have a couple of things, and ideally two things that are not related. One of my favorite examples of this is this guy, Max, right? He used to love history. And so when he went out to make content, he didn't just make history content though, because he knew that there were so many other people in the history space making videos about history. So he asked himself, what was this other thing that he was good at? And he was also pretty good at cooking. So he combined history and cooking, two things that are not connected to each other, and made a YouTube channel where he would cook the favorite recipes of famous historical figures. Like he made a dish that Napoleon used to really like, and he made another dish on medieval ribs. And because he combined these two things that were not connected, he built something truly unique and was able to stand out from every other food or history creator out there. He made his own niche. He went blue ocean strategy and did his own thing. And now he has no competition because no one else can do those two things. And so you've got to ask yourself, what are two things that are unique to you, or three things that are really unique to you? And take those things, combine this, and create a niche of your own. And now you have no competition and you're so unique. So there's a very good chance you'll stand out. There's a very good chance you will blow up.
Williams-Sonoma was one of my biggest clients in the 90s. I built their first website. They found that if they have the web, they have catalogs, and they have their stores. They found the moment they get a customer to buy from more than one channel, to buy both off their e-commerce site and in the store, that consumer becomes worth 160% or 60% worth more over their lifetime once they get people to become multi-channel consumers. So your ability to get people to download the podcast and listen to you in their ears, who also occasionally watch the videos, and then ideally maybe like subscribe to the newsletter or show up to an event, that consumer becomes a fanatic. And the media stars of tomorrow that has a podcast, really solid YouTube, produces books, makes some money speaking, they're kind of they're what I call decathletes, right?
A decathlete is someone who competes in a decathlon. And a decathlon is a sporting event which comprises of 10 other sporting events. I'm talking about 100 meters, 400 meters, 1,500, high jump, long jump, pole vaulting, right? And for a really long time, a decathlete was considered the ultimate athlete. And so when you're looking at your personal brand, you have also got to do a bunch of different things. And Scott is a really good example of a decathlete. He can speak on stage. He writes great books. He writes short form content in terms of threads and tweets. He's great on YouTube solo. He's great at being interviewed. He's great at interviewing other people. He's mastered so many different things, and that's why he has such a strong personal brand. Like I myself, I'm looking into joining Toastmasters so that I can get better at speaking on stage. And for my own YouTube videos, I have interviewed a bunch of people so I can get good at interviewing. Now, if you're starting off with your personal brand, it's totally okay to just pick one thing and get good at it. But you've got to realize that your personal brand is not a 1-year game. It's not even a 5-year game. It's like a 40 or a 60-year game. Because if you own a business, there's a good chance in the next 5 to 8 years, you might exit, right? But you can't exit out of your personal brand. It's you. So as long as you're going to be working, you will have a personal brand. And so when you look at it as a 40-year game, now you realize that there is time for you to pick up all of these skills and get really good at it. But it's not just being a decathlete of skills, it's also being a decathlete of interests and topics. Like if you look at Scott Galloway, he makes videos about policy, public markets, politics, economics, so many different things, even though he is a professor of marketing. He didn't pigeonhole himself and say, I'm only going to talk about marketing. No, he talks about a bunch of different things. And because he does, he's able to bring in all of these different audiences. And so don't restrict yourself to one niche. Talk about other things, bring in other perspectives, and you'll see that your total addressable market of audience will increase as a result of it. All right, so the video was done. I was going to post it. But then I noticed 2 other things that Scott was doing, and I just didn't feel comfortable posting the video without adding these 2 in because I think it's really important. So let's get started with those 2.
Today's number, $3.2 billion. That's how much MLS teams have surged in value since Messi joined Miami. Today's number, $6.6 billion. That's how much creators on OnlyFans made last year.
Every single one of Scott's videos starts off with a stat just like that. Every single one of them. And the beauty of a stat is that it's a fact, right? It's not an opinion. And also a stat is a number. It's absolute. You can't argue with it. Like if he said OnlyFans models were making a ton of money, what does a ton of money even mean? Does it mean they're making $1 million, $1 billion? I don't know, right? But when he mentions the number, it's an absolute statement and it's not open to interpretation. And because of that, it holds a lot of weight and it's a great way to start off a video. Speaking of the starting of videos, you have to realize that your audience will give you maybe 4 seconds before they decide to continue watching the video or click off and watch another video. And a stat can be put in those 4 seconds. So it's almost the perfect hook. So I'd recommend next time you're making a video, you're trying to make a point, put in a stat and then build off of that stat.
Look at me now. I'm in Aspen right now. I look like I'm in a hostage video. Look at me. I look like Joe Biden in 5 years. I look like shit here. You guys look young and handsome and cool, and you have the bookshelf, and I'm sure you selected the titles that are like wonky but retail. Anyways, that's a lot in it. And because I'm always on the road, I need sort of remote capabilities. I think I have been in the same studio with Kara in 7 years. I think we've been in the same room 6 times.
So I've noticed a trend recently. I don't know if it's Chris Williamson who started this, but every single podcast nowadays is shot in a super scenic location. Like I saw one podcast in an old abandoned church and I saw another one in like a vintage car garage. And when I talk to my clients, they think that if they make a podcast, it has to be in a super scenic location or that it at least needs to be in person. And that's just simply not the case. Scott's podcast is insanely popular and it's literally a webcam. Some of the biggest podcasts are just audio only, and there are many podcasts that have video, but the video isn't something great to look at. And that's completely okay. You have to realize when you're starting a podcast, the real value is in the conversations you're having, it's in the questions you're asking. It's in how deep you go into the topic. So if you're starting a podcast or if you're creating content, don't worry about the amazing studio shoot or the lights or the cameras. None of those things matter. Some of the best content comes from the shittiest cameras with the worst lighting and the worst locations. If you like that video, you're interested in personal branding, and if you want to work with me, you can check the link in the description. I have 2 different links. One is if you want my team to edit your videos, and the other is if you want to work with me one-on-one. I'll help you come up with video ideas, scripting. I'll basically handle your entire personal brand.